There's documented evidence of a cancer treatment that worked in the 1890s. An electric car, customers begged to keep, and a nuclear reactor that couldn't melt down. All three of these things were killed on purpose, and it has led to many a conspiracy theory as to why. The cases of these happenings we're talking about today are not rumors or speculation. These are documented on camera. They're in peer-reviewed journals or in declassified government reports. And not a conspiracies, okay? Even though they are. It's always a conspiracy. And the conspiracy's just news 6 months before it breaks. Am I right? Oh. How about Tennessee in the 1960s at the Oak Ridge National Laboratory? It's the atomic age when nuclear power was supposed to be too cheap to meter. Unlimited clean energy, the future everyone was promised in that age. But the engineers know the problem. Solid uranium fuel rods submerged in water for cooling. That is the problem. If the cooling fails and the rods overheat, that's bad. If they overheat enough, they melt. The metal cladding fails, the uranium core melts through containment, there's a radioactive release, that's a meltdown, and that's a catastrophic Homer Simpson level type deal, okay? But we're in the 60s. 3 Mile Island wouldn't happen until 1979, and the incident in Chernobyl wouldn't happen until 1986. Fukushima, 2011. In the 1960s, though, engineers already know that this is possible and that this is a ticking time bomb, essentially. A fellow by the name of Alvin Weinberg is the director of Oak Ridge National Laboratory. He's a physicist and Manhattan Project veteran who's been the director since 1955 there. He knows the obvious potential of nuclear power. He also knows the obvious potential of its danger. He asks a question. What if the fuel was already liquid? His team at Oak Ridge builds the molten salt reactor experiment, the MSRE. Fuel isn't solid rods, it's uranium that's dissolved in molten fluoride salts. Liquid fuel flows through the reactor core, it gets hot, it transfers heat to generate steam, and that drives turbines, produces electricity, and then it cycles back. By the way, that's how nuclear power works. Steam. That's what actually puts the power into motion. With the molten system, if something goes wrong, for example, a loss of power or a cooling failure, maybe an operator error, Chernobyl, the liquid fuel drains. It drains passively using gravity. There's no pumps required. It drains into shielded tanks that are underground, and the geometry of the tanks prevents criticality. The reaction stops. It is a fail-safe that is designed by nature, kind of. You can't have a meltdown because the fuel is already molten, and you can't have a runaway reaction because the fuel drains automatically if the core temperature rises past its safe limits. So they're testing this thing, and in 1965, the MSRE goes critical. It is the first sustained nuclear reaction. It runs until 1969. That's 4 years and over 13,000 hours at full power. During those 4 years, they test everything. They shut it down intentionally dozens of times to verify the safety systems. They drain the fuel, prove the passive drain works. They restart it. They switch fuel types. They go from uranium-233 to uranium-235 to test fuel flexibility. It all performs flawlessly. The operational reports are positive, and Paul Haubenreich, chief engineer, writes in the 1970 final report,
"The MSRE operation has demonstrated that a molten salt reactor can be operated safely and reliably."
That's his voice. He sounds like that. It is a technical success, a proven concept, and safer than conventional solid fuel reactors by its very design. So obviously the next step is the government funds this further. They scale it up and build commercial molten salt reactors, and we eventually have our own in our backyard that powers our AI systems, right? Wrong. You see, in 1969, Richard Nixon is the president, and the Atomic Energy Commission gets new leadership. A guy by the name of Milton Shaw becomes director of the Office of Reactor Development, and Shaw has a mandate. The liquid metal fast breeder reactor, the LMFBR, is America's nuclear future. All resources will focus there. The LMFBR is a different design. It is solid uranium fuel cooled by liquid sodium. Sodium, though, is problematic. It explodes on contact with water and burns on contact with air. So, it's a bad idea. It seems like, just on paper, a little bit. The reactor is complex, expensive, and technically challenging. So why the would they choose it? Well, it's the B in the name right there. It has one feature that the molten salt reactor doesn't have. It breeds plutonium. and it breeds a lot of plutonium. The LMFBR produces plutonium that can be reprocessed for weapons programs. The military-industrial complex, guys. Hiding nuclear tensions, Cold War, the LMFBR isn't just a civilian power reactor, it's a dual use that produces electricity and feeds the weapons pipeline. The molten salt reactor produces minimal plutonium. It's optimized for safety and efficiency, not weapons material. For civilian power generation, it's superior. For military purposes, it's useless, which means we're not going to use it. Now, obviously, Weinberg fights for the MSR. He publishes papers, gives presentations to the AEC, and argues that for civilian power, for public safety, the molten salt design is clearly superior. And he's not shy about saying that. I mean, he said it lots. The LMFBR is prioritized because of the military-industrial complex, not for the people of America. In 1972, Alvin Weinberg, director of Oak Ridge for 18 years, is fired. And take a guess why. Was it because he opened an email and unleashed a zip bomb in the intranet, which didn't even exist at that time? No. Is it because he was caught in a love triangle scandal with Allen Dulles, the director of the CIA? No. It was because he advocated for the wrong reactor, the one for the people of the United States of America. Sorry, dweeb. Nerd. No defense contracts for you. Later in his life, he wrote a memoir called The First Nuclear Era, and in that he wrote, "I was still espousing the molten salt breeder. We were pushing molten salt, not LMFBR." So maybe he was just reassigned. Maybe he wasn't actually fired, but, you know, kind of unfair, to be honest, if you ask me. Either way, the man who oversaw the successful operation of the MSRE, who proved the concept and that it worked, is removed because he wouldn't stop advocating for it. And on December 12, 1969, the MSRE was shut down. The official reason from the AEC memo was so that funds supporting its operation could be used elsewhere in the research and development program. Israel. 50 billion, I guess. I don't really know. I thought that's a joke. Maybe it's funny. Maybe it has to do with the assassination of JFK. I really don't know. I'm just the conspiracy guy. I'm a crackpot. And to be honest, before I filmed this video, I hit the crack pipe. In 1976, the entire molten salt reactor program is terminated. This is after it's already been defunded. Weinberg is gone, the funding is gone, and Oak Ridge moves on to other projects. The LMFBR, meanwhile, is consuming billions of dollars. The Clinch River Breeder Reactor Project, the flagship of the American LMFBR program, launched in 1972. It was projected to cost $400 million by 1981, $2.2 billion by 1983, 3.6 billion. By the way, it never operates. Congress cancels the project in 1983 after spending $3 billion of 1980s dollars, and there's zero electricity generated. Are you kidding me? France builds their own version of an LMFBR called the Super Phoenix. It opens in 1986, but it is plagued by sodium leaks and technical problems. It operates intermittently before closing in 1998. It operated for 2 years out of 12 and cost them $12 billion. Japan builds an LMFBR called Manju, and in 1995, a catastrophic sodium leak dumps 3 tons of liquid sodium that catches fire. The reactor shuts down and stays offline for 14 years, briefly restarts in 2010, shuts down again in 2011, and finally closes permanently in 2016, guys. And what's the total electricity generated in its 20-year lifetime? Almost none. Total cost? Over $9 billion. The LMFBR, the reactor that was supposed to be the future, fails repeatedly, expensively, and catastrophically every time. The government said the molten salt reactor was too experimental and defunded it in 1976, but it ran successfully for 4 years with 0 serious safety incidents, and the LMFBR, plagued by sodium fires, cost overruns, technical failures, got 50 years of funding and was built in multiple countries. Billions of dollars were spent on it, multiple failed projects, and it is still considered a viable design for future reactors. My assumption is that it was just making plutonium. It's just, you know, who cares about electricity generation? That's just to get funding. It's going to generate electricity. Imagine if our elected officials had to show when they were crossing their fingers when they made a promise. Imagine. And then we could tar and feather them and round them up. Am I right, fellow Americans? So after all this, conventional solid fuel reactors, the design that can melt down due to the laws of nature, became the global standard. 3 Mile Island occurred on March 28, 1979. It was a partial meltdown. Solid fuel rods overheated, the core was damaged, and containment was breached. It was a $1 billion cleanup, and an entire region was evacuated. Chernobyl happened April 26, 1986. Excellent television show, by the way, one of my favorites. That reactor exploded. 50 people died immediately, and thousands more died from radiation exposure and cancers directly linked. There was a 30-kilometer exclusion zone that is still radioactive to this day and will be for 20,000 years, guys. Good job, humans. Then we have Fukushima Daiichi in March of 2011. There was an earthquake, then a tsunami, and a cooling system failure. 3 reactors melted down, 160,000 residents were evacuated, and the exclusion zone there still remains in effect. And Japan's not a very big place, so that's even worse. So it seems like most, if not all, of the reasons people think that nuclear energy is scary and terrifying are all caused because of these disasters. They're a result of these disasters and conventional solid fuel reactors. None of these disasters would or could have happened with a molten salt reactor. The failure modes are completely different. The fuel's already liquid and drains if the core overheats. Meltdown is physically impossible. It's already melted. But we all collectively chose the reactors that could and did fail catastrophically. Good job. Why? Because they make plutonium, and military priorities obviously are going to override civilian safety, and because the Nixon administration wanted nuclear bombs more than it wanted safe energy for its people. And now we have an actual issue with energy in America, which I do like the military a lot, and I like guns, and I'm not so much on bombs, really, or drones or anything like that. I like guns a lot. It's sad, man. It's sad. I would rather have nuclear energy. Is that Todd Howard? Weird. Though get this, my friends, the technology didn't die completely. China is developing molten salt reactors. Of course they are. Their TMSR LF1 went critical in 2021. It was the first new MSR in over 50 years. TerraPower, funded by Bill Gates, is reviving thorium-based molten salt designs. They're partnering with the US Department of Energy, and there are startup companies across the United States, Canada, and Europe that are pursuing variations. Couple examples are Terrestrial Energy, Moltex, and Thorcon. I live really close to a nuclear reactor, and it's very scary to me. I live like next to it. I see Homer on his way to work, Mr. Simpson. 50 years of dangerous reactors, nuclear horrors, 3 major public disasters, public fears that were unlocked that nearly killed nuclear power entirely, all preventable. Because in 1969, decided plutonium was more important than safety. So, that's what I say to that. In the early 90s, Los Angeles is a shithole. The sky is brown with stage 3 smog alerts, so bad that children stay inside during recess. The air, it tastes metallic. The California Air Resources Board, or CARB, measures particulates, and during the early 90s, they were watching emissions climb. Their headquarters is in yet another shithole, Sacramento. Staff scientists were poring over data showing Los Angeles breaching the federal clean air standards year after year. And these people, they face a choice: incremental improvements, tighter standards on tailpipes that still burn gasoline, or force a revolution, an electric vehicle revolution, potentially. This is the 90s, by the way. They're commonplace now. This was the 90s. Jeananne Sharpless became CARB chairwoman in 1989, a former state legislator and environmental advocate who's not interested in incremental changes. In September of 1990, during a CARB board meeting in beautiful Sacramento, Jeananne proposed the zero emissions vehicle mandate, which made 2% of every automaker's California fleet required to be emission-free by 1998, then 5% by 2001, and 10% by 2003. That's very aggressive and did not happen, by the way. GM was like this. They said, the technology doesn't exist. You're asking us to build cars that can't be built. Fast forward to 1996. GM has the EV1 program that is run by Ken Baker, the vice president of R&D for GM. And Baker, working out of the GM Technical Center in Warren, Michigan, believes in what they're building. His team produces something that doesn't look like even a compromise. It's a sleek, beautiful, and aerodynamic machine with a coefficient of drag of 0.19, better than most sports cars. 0 0 to 60 in under 8 seconds with a range of 70 to 100 miles depending on the battery pack. It's fast, and it's a real car. This is the mid-90s. Now, in December of 1996, back in California, GM begins leasing EV1s. That is the name of this creature. Lease only. There is no option for purchase. The contract is explicit. GM retains ownership of the EV1. At this time, the lease-only requirement looks like a risk management technique for new technology in an uncertain market. But later, it begins to look like something else. The customers, they love the EV1. Customers start joining EV1 clubs where they gather together and evangelize by saying, "We love our car," harmonizing. And it makes sense. This thing's awesome. There's no oil changes, no transmission service, no exhaust repairs, brake pads that last 100,000 miles due to regenerative braking. You plug it in at night, it's ready in the morning. This thing is a Tesla well before Tesla was even a thing. So GM, obviously seeing this massive response, scales up. There's more leases, more cities. They expand the program, right? Wrong! In 2001, a fellow by the name of Alan Lloyd became the CARB chairman. Dr. Alan Lloyd, respected and credentialed individual. He's also simultaneously the chairman of the California Fuel Cell Partnership, which is a consortium of automakers and oil companies promoting hydrogen fuel cells as the clean vehicle technology of the future as opposed to batteries. Hydrogen fuel cells require infrastructure though. They require fueling stations, distribution networks, and hydrogen productions. And if you know anything about science and stuff, you know that hydrogen is really hard to come by. The point is, all this is controlled by the same companies that currently sell gasoline. Battery electric vehicles plug into an outlet at home. The infrastructure already exists at every human being's house. And then they want to do this other thing that is controlled by oil and gas. April 24th, 2003, CARB meeting, Sacramento, California, beautiful city. Dr. Lloyd presides. The board votes to amend the zero-emission vehicle mandate. The original target, 10% of California's fleet, roughly 100,000 vehicles by 2003, is now 250 vehicles total by 2008. That seems like a lower number. 100,000 vehicles down to 250. That's a 99.75% reduction. That is Jay Leno's garage, literally. So the automakers, big oil, big gas, who had sued CARB repeatedly, they won. The zero emission mandate is completely dead. A short while after this happens, GM sends a letter to all lessees of their beloved EV1 platform.
When I noticed that GM was losing interest was when I wanted to release my car, and they wouldn't let me.
They didn't give me an option to buy. They said, "Thank you for leasing the car.
Turn
Bye-bye."
it in now. Turn it in by such and such a date, or you're going to be held liable.
And obviously the customers who love their vehicles say, "I'll buy it. I don't give a, I'll pay double the residual value." GM says, "Not for sale."
Join me in holding this check offering $1.9 million to General Motors to put these cars back on the road.
Despite the offer, GM did not respond.
It's all very confusing, and it begs the question, why? No oil changes. That's a massive loss. That's a huge hit to their vehicular economy. No transmission service. That's $500 every 50,000 miles for a vehicle. That's also lost. No exhaust system repairs. $800 over a total lifetime of the vehicle lost. That's $3,000 to $4,000 extra per vehicle that they're no longer making because the vehicle is so good. Because the vehicle is so efficient. Isn't it awesome? Multiply that $3,000 to $4,000 by every EV sold, multiply that by millions of vehicles. Dealerships make around a 50% margin off the rev from service bays, and the EV1 clearly threatens that. Hydrogen fuel cell infrastructure aligns with existing fueling model and supply chain partnerships.
I think the reason the oil industry likes hydrogen so much is that hydrogen is basically a way for them to ship something around in their trucks to not charging stations, but fueling stations, just like oil. It's the same exact paradigm for the oil industry.
So clearly, somebody didn't want this thing going anywhere. Oil industry lobbying expenditures from 2000 to 2003 are public record, and their message was absolute and consistent. Battery electric vehicles are a niche product with limited consumer appeal. Hydrogen represents the future. Now, we're obviously seeing in 2025 that that's not the case, and every single manufacturer of vehicles is jumping on the EV bandwagon. Next step, let the leases expire and take away people's EV1s. This thing they actually tried to erase from history. It is a car that I had no idea existed ever until researching for this video, and lobbyists and oil companies for the greater good of people buying vehicles? No, not for consumers whatsoever. Did their best to erase this vehicle from history. So everyone's cars across California are being snatched up by the big bad evil man, and customers organize protests. They offer to buy the cars, they file petitions, some offer to sign waivers releasing GM from all liability. Just let us keep the cars. GM obviously refuses every single offer. The cars are then transported to a GM facility in Mesa, Arizona, out in the desert where it's remote.
We could see right next to the racetrack where the EV1 was first tested, we saw, I don't know, maybe 50 EV1s crushed and put on top of semi-flatbeds.
Activists track them down, some follow the trucks, they take photos of stacks of EV1s, dozens of them, and then there's a crusher. They get destroyed. Thank you to ZocDoc for sponsoring this video. Listen, it's almost the end of 2025, and we can't keep pretending that walking it off is a real medical plan. I myself am tired of Googling a sore throat and being told that I need more water or I'm dying. There is a third option. It is an application that has been a long-time sponsor of this channel. It's called ZocDoc. ZocDoc is a free app and website where you can search and compare actual high-quality in-network doctors. They've got more than 100,000 different providers across everything from primary care, dental, eye doctors, urgent care, even mental health. Plus, every doctor has verified patient reviews, so you're not just guessing like you do with gas station sushi. And when you find your person, you can see their real appointments and openings, pick a time that works, and then book instantly. ZocDoc handles every corner of your body, every nook, every cranny. The best part is appointments usually happen within 24 to 72 hours, and a lot of the time, it's same day. Use ZocDoc, stop putting off doctor's appointments, and go to zocdoc.com/Oompaville to find and instantly book a top-rated doctor today. That's ZocDoc.com/Oompaville. It's on the screen, QR code, whatever you need to do. There have been a few over the years that have showed up at different impound auctions, places like that, where they're kind of beyond the purview of what GM was allowed to take back. Pretty interesting. But either way, they crushed them some bitches up. There's even a documentary called Who Killed the Electric Car that films all of this. The crusher descending, cars flattening into piles of compressed metal, electric vehicles that were once perfectly functional and beloved by their owners completely destroyed. Why? You know why, dude. The car was going to kill their maintenance revenue and destroy their partnership with the hydrogen industry. Oil, big gas. They didn't literally kill the electric car to protect oil company profits. It was more of a writing of strategic partner engagement and protection from the leaked memos and presentation slides that came out during the discovery of unrelated litigation.
I wasn't around for EV1 quite yet. I wasn't in the company, but I think that would have been one example of something that the company should not have done, which was cancel.
We should not have done that. That's the current president of GM, by the way, saying, we should not have canceled the EV1. Sorry, didn't mean to make fun of him like that, but I'm ruthless, dude. You should see me off camera. I'm a really mean person. Like, actually mean, really mean. I dream about making fun of people. So not a conspiracy. The current leader of the company that did this is like, yeah, we definitely shouldn't have done that. And this was 20 years ago, 25 years ago. Imagine how different vehicles would look now if there were electric ones. By the way, I don't have any electric vehicles. I don't really like them very much. I have a golf cart, all right? And I have an F-250, okay? The opposite of an electric vehicle. I don't know why I said that. But I'd like to get one, but everywhere you go where I live is like 2 hours. You have to drive 2 hours to get anywhere, and I feel like it's not very efficient for me. So maybe one of these days I'll stop destroying the environment. Now let us return further to the past, to New York City at the New York Cancer Hospital, later renamed the Memorial Sloan Kettering Hospital. We are now following a man named William Bradley Coley. He's a 28-year-old surgeon who just finished training. In his first year on staff, he treated a 17-year-old girl named Elizabeth who had an inoperable bone sarcoma. The tumor was gigantic. It wrapped around the radius in her right forearm. Due to how invasive the tumor was, the surgery would require amputation. There's not really any good options. And once again, it's 1890. Coley tries, and tragically, the girl died. Now, surgeons lose patients today, but in 1890, it happened all the time. But for some reason, Coley couldn't let it go. And he does what doctors do when they lose a young patient. He searches the hospital for records, looking for similar cases, things that may have worked on other people. In his searching, he found a file from 1885 for a patient named Fred Stein. The diagnosis was an inoperable sarcoma of the neck and tonsil. Stein had been sent home to die, but something happened. He developed a severe bacterial infection, erysipelas, which was caused by the Streptococcus bacteria. The infection nearly killed him. His fever spiked to 105 degrees Fahrenheit. He spent weeks delirious, but when the infection finally cleared, something strange happened. His tumor had shrunk and it kept shrinking. And by the time Stein recovered from the infection, the cancer was nearly gone. So Coley sets out to find Stein. Lo and behold, he is still alive 7 years after being sent home to die, and Stein is cancer-free, free of a sarcoma of the neck and tonsils. So Coley, now obviously onto something, searches further and finds 6 more cases, different patients, different hospitals, and the same type of pattern: a severe bacterial infection, high fever, regression of a tumor. It is not a fluke. It's a replicable thing that has happened to multiple people. Science. Then, a year after going down this rabbit hole, Coley has a patient, an Italian immigrant named Zola, with an inoperable sarcoma of the neck. The tumor is large, visible, and growing. Coley makes a decision that would horrify every modern medical ethics board. He deliberately infects the patient with live Streptococcus bacteria. He injects bacteria directly into the tumor. So the fever comes, 104 degrees, then 105. The patient is delirious and near death as the infection rages. Coley monitors and adjusts, all trying to keep the infection from killing the patient outright. And then the tumor shrinks visibly and measurably, and it works. And over the next 40 years, William Coley treats more than 1,000 cancer patients with what becomes known as Coley's toxins. He refines the approach over time, switching from live bacteria to killed bacteria to reduce the risk of uncontrolled infection. And he even eventually settles on the ultimate cocktail of bacteria. It's a mixture of Streptococcus pyogenes and Serratia marcescenses. They're heat-killed and suspended in a delicious, succulent solution. Coley even publishes his findings in peer-reviewed medical journals. For example, the treatment of malignant tumors by repeated inoculations of erysipelas. This appeared in the American Journal of the Medical Sciences in 1893. He documents cases with photographs from before and after with names, dates, and outcomes. For certain cancers, bone and soft tissue sarcomas especially, his reported success rates are extraordinary even by today's standards with modern medicine. He achieved complete regression in some cases and long-term remission in others. Now we jump forward a few years to the early 1900s. Dr. James Ewing is a pathologist and pioneer in cancer research. He's Coley's supervisor, and he sees a different future. In 1895, Wilhelm Röntgen discovered X-rays, and by 1900, doctors realized that radiation can target tumors. It's clean, it's precise, and doesn't involve injecting patients with dead bacteria and waiting through fevers. It's a lot more replicable. It's a lot easier to study. And radiation therapy can be standardized with the same dose, same targeting, same protocol. Every single time, it's a more scientific method. So Coley's supervisor, Ewing, becomes a champion of radiation therapy. It requires expensive equipment. A single X-ray machine in the 1920s cost tens of thousands of dollars, which is equivalent to hundreds of thousands of doll hairs today. But once a hospital invests, it can treat patient after patient with standardized protocols, measurable doses, and repeatable procedures. On the flip side, Coley's toxins are more labor-intensive. Every batch must be carefully prepared, potency can vary, and dosing has to be individualized because each patient responds differently. You have to monitor through fevers and adjust in real time. It's more of a magic than a medicine, and it doesn't scale very well. Especially not in the late 1800s and early 1900s. People were off the wall back then. So we get to the 1920s and 30s, and the American Medical Association is pushing for standardization. This era becomes the era of scientific medicine with evidence-based protocols and reproducible results. Lobotomy still, but it's starting to look more like modern medicine. And Coley's approach, though documented in journals, doesn't necessarily fit that model. It's too variable and too dependent on the judgment of individual physicians. Ewing champions radiation, and funding follows. Hospitals invest in X-ray equipment, training programs emphasize radiation protocols, and Coley's toxins become marginalized. Not because they don't work, and not because they're not delicious, but because they don't fit the business model of standardized equipment-dependent medicine. So things are starting to make more sense now. Then a few more years goes by and chemotherapy emerges. The origin of chemotherapy is bleak. To be honest with you, mustard gas, a chemical weapon from World War I, is found to shrink tumors. Nitrogen mustard becomes the first chemotherapy drug. Then after that, there are more. Pharmaceutical companies invest, then there's large-scale clinical trials, we have standardized protocols, and modern medicine starts to really take shape. Coley eventually dies in 1936, and his daughter, Helen Coley Knotts, tries to continue the work. She catalogs her father's cases, publishes analyses, advocates for funding, but by this time, the momentum has completely shifted. Cancer treatment is now radiation plus surgery plus chemotherapy. It's the three pillars of oncology. Coley's toxins are off patent. Anyone can mix up the delicious cocktail. Bacterial cultures aren't exclusive. There's no pharmaceutical company with an incentive to fund expensive phase 3 trials. There's no profit protection. There's no real benefit, on paper at least. Then comes 1962. The Kefauver-Harris Amendment passes, and FDA drug approval requirements tighten. That pesky FDA. It's at this point that any drug must prove safety and efficacy through rigorous controlled trials. Oh, what does that even mean? By the way, me using this to say safety and all this stuff and take the piss out of the FDA is a joke. I think modern medicine is incredible, and I think doctors are genius people, and I think that the only thing that makes them more effective beyond their existing system and infrastructure is if their patients also try to actually take care of themselves and eat healthy and so on and so forth. I am very much for modern medicine. I love it, guys. So Coley's toxins, which were up until this point in use for decades without formal FDA approval, are now retroactively classified as an unapproved drug. So to continue using them, it would require multi-million-dollar clinical trials. And obviously, no one funds the trials. Why the would they? Just because they're delicious doesn't mean that they're worth spending money on. And off-patent bacterial preparation competing with patented chemotherapy drugs that you can just make. Pharmaceutical companies fund trials for drugs that they can sell exclusively because we have a system that is built upon that. Coley's toxins offer zero exclusivity, and they're delicious. I keep saying that. I'm sorry if that's a joke that you guys don't think is funny, but I think it's funny to imagine drinking stuff like that. I don't know why. By 1965, Coley's toxins are completely abandoned, and in mainstream oncology, the first step is to use surgery to remove tumors, then use radiation to kill the remaining cells, and chemotherapy to target metastases. And at this point in time, immunotherapy, the idea that you could activate the immune system to fight cancer, is dismissed as a type of pseudoscience. Look what these people used to do. They used to feed them delicious cocktails to cure their cancer and stuff. So 30 years goes by. The 1990s, James P. Allison, an immunologist from the University of California, Berkeley. He's not studying cancer, he's studying T cells, aka white blood cells that attack invaders. He discovers a protein on the surface of T cells called CTLA4. It functions as a brake, and when CTLA4 is activated, T cells stop attacking. So Allison realizes tumors are not invisible to the immune system sees tumors, but the brakes on T cells are on. If CTLA4 is activated, T cells are inhibited and tumors can grow unchecked. So the hypothesis is block CTLA4, release the brake, T cells may attack the tumor. By the mid-90s, the year I was born, Allison tests it in mice. He blows those sumbitches up like little balloons. He injects them with tumors. They're disgusting. They're disfigured. It's like the movie I Am Legend. He treats them then with antibodies that block CTLA4. The tumors shrink, some disappear completely, and mice that should be dead are cancer-free in his trials. Then meanwhile, in Japan, we have Tasuku Honjo at Kyoto University. He discovers another brake for T cells, PD-1. It's the same exact principle, block it, the immune system then attacks tumors. Pharmaceutical companies then start to take notice. This is a patentable thing. These are called monoclonal antibodies. They are complex molecules, expensive to manufacture, and protectable under patent law. Unlike Coley's bacterial cultures, these are exclusive, profitable, and not nearly as delicious. So fast forward to 2011, the FDA approves ipilimumab, a CTLA4 inhibitor for metastatic melanoma. Stage 4 melanoma, terminal diagnosis, average life expectancy a couple months. Some patients treated with ipilimumab go into complete remission and years later are still cancer-free. More drugs follow. Pembrolizumab, nivolumab, nivolumab, or Opdivo I've seen commercials for these, which is insane. I remember from my childhood or young teenager years seeing commercials for these things, especially ipilimumab. These things are pretty remarkable. They transform treatment for melanoma, lung cancer, kidney cancer, and other things, but not every patient responds, but for those who do, it is transformative. And in 2018, the Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine is awarded to James P. Allison and Tasuku Honjo. The Nobel citation explicitly references early immunotherapy pioneers. William Coley's name appears in that Nobel Prize. And now modern scientific papers call him the father of immunotherapy and a master mixologist. So the mechanism that Allison and Honjo discovered, it activates the immune system and it kills cancer cells. It's the same fundamental mechanism that William Coley stumbled onto in 1891, over 100 years earlier, when he injected a patient with bacteria and watched a tumor shrink. So we abandoned this thing for 70 years, and it took 100 years from its first inception for it to start to be really studied, and then over that for it to win a couple people a Nobel Prize. It was abandoned not because it didn't work, but rather because it didn't fit into the model of 20th century medicine, and that was a profit model. So, and that seems conspiratorial to say, but it really, unless I'm completely wrong, it's just not. That's just the reality of it. Obviously, technology has improved drastically, and we no longer do a lot of dumb shit, but it seemed like Coley had kind of a layup, and the reason that it was abandoned is because he was ahead of his time. And in the modern times, checkpoint inhibitors, the successors of Coley's predecessors, are now multi-billion-dollar drugs. Keytruda alone is $25 billion in annual sales. They're profitable because they're patentable molecular therapies that are exclusive and controlled, and they're not a delicious mix of various bacteria scraped off various surfaces from the 1800s. It is insane, though. The underlying principle, immune activation kills cancer, was available in 1891 for the cost of bacterial cultures. And now it's a multi-billion-dollar industry that's owned. It seems, I don't know, I'm no commie, all right, guys? I'm no dirty commie, okay? But I kind of get it in that sense. I kind of understand it. What is horrible and tragic to think about and start to ponder is the idea of how many cancer patients died in that gap who may have responded to immunotherapy. Everybody has been touched by cancer, and everybody will be touched by cancer. Not physically necessarily. I think it's 1 in 2. 50% of people will develop some form of cancer at some stage in their life. But just knowing somebody who you love who will develop and die from cancer is very likely. It's just tragic to think about that, and it's f***ed up. But it's part of life, though, obviously, and that's what all life is, apparently, just suffering, I've learned as I've gotten older, which is pretty f***ed up. So, we'll never know how many people could have been saved by this drug if it wasn't for the damn FDA. Just kidding. I know it's more complicated than that. I know it's not a deliberate Stromboli situation of a guy, cancer's good, but it definitely is a result of a system that is massively flawed. So let's be real about that. We've established a pattern here. There are evil forces at work. Are they direct evil forces like some kind of Stromboli figure pulling the strings behind the curtain? No. There are corporate espionage cases that have made it to court with documented theft convictions and massive, insane, terrifying settlements. If you invent something that goes against the status quo, you're in danger legally. Let's take, for example, former Google engineer working on Waymo, Google's self-driving car project. In January of 2016, he downloaded 14,000 confidential files covering LiDAR technology, autonomous vehicle systems, and proprietary Google algorithms. He leaves Google, takes that stuff, and starts a self-driving truck company called Otto. On October 2016, Uber acquires Otto for $680 million. Waymo sues, there's an overwhelming level of evidence, and in February of 2018, Uber settles with $245 million to Waymo. They agree to not use the stolen technology, and in August of 2019, Lewandowski, the man who did this, is criminally charged with 33 counts of trade secret theft. So we have 3 cases, 3 different times something like this happened in very big ways. How many times did a small startup of 3 people create something that then was destroyed through attrition by some kind of defensive patent lawsuit? We don't want that. We don't want that getting out on the market. Here's an NDA and $100 million, so it never does because it will destroy our business. How many times has that happened and there is just no way for us to ever know? Who knows, dude? I certainly don't. But we do know that companies buy patents not to develop technology, but rather to prevent competitors from developing that technology. Nintendo does this shit all the time. For example, why are batteries so shit still? How many battery chemistry improvements are locked in oil company patent portfolios? How many solar panel efficiency gains are shelved by utility companies? We have no idea. We'll never know. Patents are public, but the decision to use or not use them isn't necessarily. And some of them are theoretical and all this stuff. It's like, what's NDA'd, what's not? It's pretty crazy. At a certain point, it seems like all this stuff starts to blend together, and you go down the list of all the conspiracies. For example, MK Ultra documents. The CIA destroyed most of the records in 1973. The 20,000 pages that survive are totally incomplete. What was in the files that they burned? Or how many brilliant scientists pursued cold fusion in the 90s and got laughed out of conferences and switched careers? Or how many immunotherapy researchers in the 70s, just after the FDA activation, gave up after being told immunotherapy is pseudoscience? Luckily, nowadays, the internet makes suppression harder. For example, I just saw a tweet from John Brennan, the former director of the CIA, saying that the CIA will get people to spy for them, and as soon as they decide to not do that anymore, they're blackmailed. So you can't trust or believe anything that isn't open source, essentially. And unfortunately, you have to go to things that are open source, but fortunately, there's a lot of options now that are just available for people, and it's going to continue to grow and grow and grow because people are awesome, and hopefully, you know, we'll continue getting better. I think, I hope. I don't really know, guys.